Who do you think are the toughest guys in pro wrestling? Are they the brawny, bearded brutes using their 300-pound frames to knock their opponents around? Or the dudes dressed head to toe in protective gear, looking like they're more prepared for a SWAT team raid than a wrestling match? The toughest men in pro wrestling. Well, those are the men who don't hide their faces and bodies behind layers of thick facial hair, tattoos, or clothing. He is the pretty boy. He has bright eyes and a handsome, youthful face that sends the crowd, particularly the females, screaming with desire and hysteria. Why is the pretty boy the toughest man in the ring, you ask? Because these good guys must not only endure unfair, brutal beatings from sadistic larger men, they have to be able to deliver a solid ass-kicking themselves. They're not jobbers brought in to make other guys look strong. Lose too many matches and it won't matter how good you look if you're picking your ass off the floor after every match. So how do you tell when a wrestler is a pretty boy? Ask yourself the following questions. Number 1. Would he look out of place in a popular boy band? If the answer is no, then you probably have yourself a pretty boy. He's generally clean cut, at most with a little bit of stubble, and maybe a few tattoos to toughen up his image, but certainly not so much that he looks like a Los Angeles thug. He's the kind of guy who would get an unfair advantage in a job interview just because he looks honest, approachable, and intelligent. Number 2. Is he wearing simple wrestling gear, like a pair of trunks in a lighter color and with minimal detail? In order to relate to the every man and woman, the pretty boy is not going to be wearing heavily bejeweled gear and luxurious ring jackets that reek of wealth and arrogance. He is an athlete first and doesn't need layers of clothing to insulate him from strikes. You also won't find him in street clothes because, well, he's a professional wrestler and not going to Walmart to shop. Number 3. Is he confident but not cocky? This is a fine line to straddle but very important to the pretty boy's character. He has to display his chiseled body to make the girls and some of the boys go gaga, but in a quietly confident way rather than a self-absorbed manner. When he makes his entrance, he greets his fans earnestly. But don't be fooled. Sometimes the pretty boy might look very similar to the cocky jock, but they are definitely a different breed. When the cocky jock walks out, he smells of arrogance and narcissism, and they are much more likely to be sneering at the crowd than high-fiving them. Number 4. Does he fight clean? You won't see the pretty boy dishing out low blows, pulling hair, grabbing the tights, choking people on ropes. He's much more likely to stick to the techniques that he learned in wrestling school, using a combination of mat work and high-flying maneuvers to make his opponent submit. But sadly, in the dark and gnarly world of pro wrestling, the pretty boy's refusal to fight dirty may put him at a disadvantage, which leads me to number 5. Is he often at the receiving end of unfair and sadistic punishment? Whether it's foreign objects slammed against his back, being beaten up after the bell rings, or being hit in the ballsack, the other wrestlers love to torture the pretty boys, because who better than the hometown hero would they use to make an example out of? It seems that wrestlers just can't stand the virtuousness and good looks of the pretty boy. Perhaps this was most evident in the early days of Randy Orton's career, where he was completely double-crossed by his older team members, who were clearly jealous of his success with younger women. They emasculated him by hurting his manhood, and pulling the back of his tights up his ass to make him look more like a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model than a wrestler, and this is certainly not how a tough pro wrestler would want to be seen. I would hazard a guess that a lot of these so-called tough guys who like to humiliate pretty boys were brought up in environments that frowned upon men being concerned about their appearance, and with the way that these guys would humiliate the pretty boys, they probably still think you can lay a good beating into a guy to make sure he'll grow up to be a real man who works in a coal mine and drives a pickup truck. In recent memory, one of the wrestlers who best epitomized the pretty boy is Stanley, who really left his mark in his home state of Tennessee. He shows up for his matches looking like a Spartan warrior ready for battle, sporting a bronzed and cut body that looks equal parts tough and agile. Once he takes off his exoskeleton, he reveals that his battle gear is a pair of brightly colored pro trunks, coupled with spotless white boots. Unlike many wrestlers who choose to cover their bodies in black, Nick steers clear of this generic choice and goes for a warmer look that signals strong technical ring skills as well as a sense of sincerity. And as you can hear from the deafening screams from the crowd upon his entrance, Nick dazzles with his looks. Nick's personality stands in stark contrast to the overly cocky and self-absorbed wrestler. Nick Stanley is a very honest and skilled fighter in the ring. He undertakes a solid repertoire of chain wrestling moves, slams, and strikes, all expertly executed. But pro wrestling is a universe where good is always in a constant struggle with evil, and often good intentions do not go very far. Quite frankly, society does provide unfair advantages to handsome men, and particularly ones with lighter features. And thus, the pro wrestling ring almost becomes a fantasy for guys with gritty upbringings, who are finally allowed to dish out some pain on a dirty blonde, middle-class suburban boy, to level the playing field and show him how things work in the real world.
Everything that you believe in, everything that you stand for, is everything that we hate. It's everything that we despise.
When Nick Stanley pulls on his wrestling trunks, beaming goodness and lovability, he wades into this murky world of wrestlers. He has to face egotistical men with twisted intentions, antisocial behavior, and massive egos. He insists on facing them with strong Christian values, never cheating and fighting clean. And damn, I know he's got thick skin because he goes down hard for sticking up for his values. Like hyenas, a lot of these wrestlers are salivating at the opportunity to take down the noble Golden Lion. It can be hard to watch sadistic opponents try to knock Nick out even after he wins a match, or call on their buddies to have him further beaten down in a humiliating fashion. Often he ends up having to be rescued, or lying spread eagle on the mat as if he was a loser. And all throughout his matches, he endures a slew of verbal abuse, his opponents clearly getting a rise out of battering this backstreet boy and mocking his model qualities.
You're a Prettyboy model! This is a wrestling ring! You don't belong here, son!
Only when Nick suffers at the hands of degenerates will the audience come back week after week and screaming at the top of their lungs and hoping that he pulls off a win. Pro wrestling can be torturous to the mind, and the crowd is strung along as Nick pulls off a victory to uplift their spirits, just to see his body utterly beaten down the next week. It is this eternal push-pull of energy and tension that makes pro wrestling so incredibly watchable. Nick Stanley seems to have put his pro wrestling career on hiatus in 2015. Was it because enduring beatings simply took too much of a physical toll? Or was it because he was not willing to compromise his Christian values to become a more vicious and selfish version of himself just to climb to the top of this twisted industry? We may never know, but wherever you are, Nick, you've got our respect. It ain't easy being a good guy in the wrestling industry, but damn, every time you climbed into the ring, you showed us that you were willing to fight for what is good.